So welcome everyone. My name is Julie Johnston and I'm with Greenheart Education and I work with Peter Carter, MD. And it's neat that he's a medical doctor and this is a planetary health conference. That works out well. And he's a founding director of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. And more recently, he's founder of the Climate Emergency Institute. And he's presented on sustainable development, environmental health policy, biodiversity, and climate change and ocean issues at international science and climate change conferences in North and South America, Europe, and Asia. So Peter is an expert, or he was an expert reviewer for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 5th Assessment Report in 2014. He's now involved in the expert review of the AR6, the next one that's going to be coming out. And he also was an expert reviewer for that IPCC special report on 1.5 degrees C, which everyone heard about in 2018. He's also, as I mentioned, the founder and director of the Climate Emergency Institute. And in 2018, he co-authored a book entitled Unprecedented Crime, Climate Science Denial and Game Changers for Survival. Okay, so that's what you're attending, is the unprecedented planetary health emergency of committed global climate change and essential responses.
Okay, hello everybody, thanks for attending. So the topic is the global climate planetary health emergency. And from the point of view of the science, my background, by the way, is environmental health policy, protection, and development. So global climate system change is the unprecedented top threat to planetary health today. I think most people are now aware of this. And this applies to sort of both definitions of planetary health, the strict definition of environmental pollution and degradation, how that affects human population health, and the inferred actual health of the living, life-supporting biosphere, Mother Earth. What I learned as a boy in England was Mother Nature. The scientific issue actually is pollution, air, water, oceans, and atmosphere. And the pollution is impacting not only the climate, it's impacting the climate system. And the climate system, importantly, includes all the systems of the biosphere. So we truly are talking about our Earth. I follow on a monthly basis the global climate change indicators. And from a medical health point of view, they're the health data of Earth. Today, these indicators are sadly at record highs, that's adverse highs. They're tracking the worst case scenario and they're accelerating. So I have a long list on this slide. We're starting with what everybody is probably almost certainly well aware of, personal lifestyle measures and values. So there's a lot of conversions I'm going to present to you, and the first one is ecological personal conversion. And interestingly, this was proposed by no less than Pope Francis. Another example is creation care. Another long-standing, most important example is indigenous values and indigenous wisdom and indigenous customary law. Not to forget, it's crucial for sustainability and also for climate stability and ocean stability. That is peaceful coexistence. So what can we each of us do is, of course, always the question. The most readily effective thing that individually we can do is conversion of our diet to become vegan, and particularly concentrating on local produce, organic produce from regenerative agriculture. And that is the good news, because certainly where we are in North America, veganism is catching on really, really fast. Secondly, and maybe this isn't thought about quite as often, is individually divest out of fossil fuels. Check what your savings are doing. Check what your bank accounts are doing. and preferably then reinvest to clean renewable energy. Clean renewable energy investment, by the way, is performing just as well, and in many cases and regions better than fossil fuel energy. So that's another good news. Personal lifestyle, values of vices and virtues. They go way, way, way back. And we need to have them back again today, I think. The value and life living style of sharing and reciprocity, avoiding debt, no plane travel, no car travel, reduce, reuse, recycle is still essential for dealing with climate and ocean change, or rather climate and ocean instability and disruptions. Be frugal. That's a old, long-standing term. Have a humble lifestyle. Don't consume where you don't have to consume. Don't do more than you have to do. Avoid buying anything new. Buy small. Use hand tools. So there's quite a selection. You may have some more good ones. But, however, the fact certainly today is that the best of personal lifestyles and lifestyle changes will not stop the destruction of Earth by the world economy and government policy. Social campaigns, of course, must continue protesting against the annihilation of life on Earth, the wrecking of the living planet, and a future legacy of collapse and misery. And we have some good examples: Extinction Rebellion, the Young People, Earth Guardians, Fridays for the Future. What's the root cause of climate disruption and ocean disruption? It's actually economics. It's our economics, which we call the economy, which has become the world economy. And it's a long-standing economics of exploitation and conflict. A great quote going back 2,000 years: the love of money is the root of evil. Usury, lending money at interest, used to be a sin. Today, we need to be aware of the huge military resources, economic, financial resources wasted by fighting, mainly over fossil fuels. And also outer space exploration. I mean, mining the moon, terraforming Mars, when we have a home planet to look after and preserve and restore. Absolute insanity. And the most terrible crime on today's children and future generations. Obviously, instead, these huge resources, I mean, we're talking for world military expenditures of well over $1 trillion a year now. So these huge resources must be dedicated to protecting and restoring planet Earth. We've been aware of the root cause of our economics for a long, long time. Here's a illustration from the New Scientist magazine going back 2008. And the headline was, "How Our Economy is Killing the Earth." So this is the root cause: the irrational, perverse, fossil-fueled, industrial consumer culture world economy. And this has been known for decades. I mean, countless books and articles and papers have been written on this. A much more recent similar publication, in a way, to the New Scientist, was published in 2015, called The Trajectory of the Anthropocene. I do not like the term Anthropocene. I want us all to work on and believe that we can remain in the Cenozoic age, this wonderful age of mammals and flowering plants, huge forests, ocean teeming with marine life. The Anthropocene, this trajectory that you see, on the one side in red, you see what are called socioeconomic trends. Those are the effects of our consumer economy: more plane travel, more cars, increased GDP, goes on and on. And then on the right in green, you see what's happening to Earth system trends. And they are all being damaged, polluted, degraded at, clearly you can see, an accelerating rate. So on the right, I've just taken 2 slides to put this into a nutshell. As the GDP goes up, the state of the biosphere goes down. There's more pollution, there's more degradation. So that's a clear proof of our economy being a thoroughly bad idea. Quotes, the greatest, most far-reaching market failure. That is how the 2006 UK Stern Commission, The Economics of Climate Change, described the economic nature of climate change. And by the way, even today, this report is excellent. The perverse world economic model that is dominating the world now clearly has to be changed. For example, I read recently the president of Bolivia proposed an economy for Mother Earth. And then we have ecological economics, which has been around as an international association for many years. However, as I say, only immediate market failure corrections, which can easily be applied by governments, can slow the destruction of the biosphere right now. So we all have to push for that. Financing. This is an annual publication. It's put out by RAN, the Rainforest Action Network, and it's a very good and important publication because it points to the financing of climate chaos, climate and ocean destruction by the big global corporate banks. So you see, we're talking up to $300 billion a year from Morgan Chase being poured into more fossil fuel extraction, production, and distribution. This clearly has to stop, and we have to all get behind RAN and tell the banks that they have to stop doing this. So what do we need? We need a true zero carbon combustion economy. The burning age is over. So we can stop burning all fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas. We've known that for a long, long time. We also have to stop burning wood because there is a really rotten industry, particularly in Europe, of burning wood pellets in industrial power plants. So that's why we're calling this a zero carbon combustion economy, no burning. And this has to take priority over these false economic solutions which are being promoted more and more nowadays, such as carbon cap and trade, carbon neutral, net zero carbon measures, carbon offsetting, negative emissions, which assume carbon dioxide removal from the atmosphere, bioenergy, as I've mentioned, burning of wood pellets, biofuels, and finally, and worst of all, so-called BECCS, bioenergy, carbon capture and storage.
So why is that so bad?
Why is BECCS so bad?
Yeah.
Firstly, it's burning biomass. But secondly, it's assuming something which we cannot do at all today, and which there is no development of any significant nature, which is it relies on so-called carbon capture and sequestration, or carbon capture and storage. I'm very happy that Greta Thunberg keeps on mentioning that her generation are being sort of condemned to supposedly rely on a technology which she's quite right is probably never going to happen. It certainly won't happen with a transformation of the so-called free market economy. And we don't need this at all. We absolutely do not need this. We are swimming, we're living in a world of energy. And so, quite simply, the only way to stop planet Earth destroying climate and ocean disruption is to stop the pollution. Zero pollution goes back many years. Now, stopping pollution means conversion. And this is the key which I'm trying, and we all need, I think, to get out, It's pretty simple. It's converting our greenhouse gas polluting current goods and services to the well-known non-polluting, what have always been called alternatives. And they're not alternatives anymore. They're the survival measures which we all have to switch to. So the point here is in the case of climate change, because carbon dioxide practically lasts forever in the atmosphere, heating the planet and acidifying the oceans, this means that lower pollution, lower carbon, it's never going to be good enough, right? So it has to be stopping greenhouse gas pollution. And in the case of fossil fuels, that also means stopping air pollution. And that fossil fuel air pollution is deadly. The latest research showing that it's killing 8 million people a year. So if anything has to be stopped right away, it's clearly that. So we can and we need to make this 100% conversion off the polluting goods and services, fossil fuels, our modern agriculture, agribusiness, food production, to the non-polluting alternatives that I think we all know are entirely practical and have been around for actually quite a long time. So some illustration of alternatives here. So obviously we can switch 100% of all our power, our energy, to zero carbon combustion, or a clean renewable, which means everlasting energy. And this switch means a golden future for present young people and all future generations. I want to make this point. The renewable clean energy is way better than probably any of us realize. We all realize how bad polluting, planet destroying and ocean destroying fossil fuel energy is. But these amazing, fantastic and rapidly growing clean zero combustion energy are no longer alternatives, and they're increasing at a rapid rate. And they are now ready to take over economically from fossil fuel energy. The only reason they aren't is the absolutely disgraceful, deplorable practice of governments subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. So I have here some other obvious solutions to the long time well-known economic market failure. So some solutions that we need to tell our governments to do and demand that our governments start to do right away. So stop fossil fuel and other carbon combustion subsidies. Stop greenhouse gas intensive food production subsidies. Both of these have been alluded to for several years by our excellent United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Apply a fully costed pollution charge to large central corporate pollutions. This was featured in the 2006 UK Stern Commission report. Prohibit bank financing of fossil fuel projects. We just cannot have our big global corporate banks investing in the death of the future. Don't allow any future discounting to damages caused by climate and ocean disruption. That's a common practice. And if there's a question, I can go into a little bit, though, so of course, I'm not an economist. But future discounting is absolutely out of the question with respect to climate and ocean damages. Apply a wealth tax. Oxfam has done excellent reports periodically pointing out that the majority of the world hardly pollutes with the planet with greenhouse gas emissions at all. The vast majority of the greenhouse gas pollution is coming from a minority of the wealthy, well-to-do in the world now as a whole, not just America and Saudi Arabia and Europe, but we have many, many, many billionaires in China and India. And so we need a wealth tax across the board. Tax the main consumer sources of greenhouse gas pollution. That's now necessary. But at the same time protect with safety nets and protect by avoiding the taxation of the poor and the disadvantaged. Educate the public that climate change is now an existential threat to our survival and what the most effective solutions are. Now, a quote a few years ago at an Earth Summit by United Nations Secretary General was that climate change, he said, was quite simply an existential threat to the survival of life on Earth and particularly to humankind. And that was an accurate and bold statement, and I applaud him for it. We also need our governments to fund now a rapid development of clean energy research and development and infrastructure. Trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars must be dedicated to this vast, biggest ever venture of human civilization. We need to fund major world security, protected forestry and marine reserves. We have forestry reserves, we have marine reserves, we need far, far bigger. We know they're successful and they need to be funded because they need to be big enough and protected enough to halt the sixth mass extinction, referred to by Cavallos and Ehrlich several years ago in their classic paper, The Sixth Extinction and Biological Extinction of Vertebrate Life on Earth. And we also need to fund the protection and the assistance of indigenous forest caretakers, because there's been some good research confirming what is pretty obvious, that the indigenous people who have inhabited and lived sustainability in the world's great forests, those regions are not being deforested. They're not being deforested. They're not being burned. They're not being turned into carbon emissions from carbon sinks, as tragically the forests, and of course I'm talking about the tropical forests in the Amazon outside of their protected regions. So the criminally evil practice of governments continuing to subsidize fossil fuels. And by the way, the International Energy Agency, that has done good work on this for many years, tells us that in the past couple of years, these subsidies are actually increasing. So here is the International Monetary Fund study of 2015, $5.3 trillion. This is really interesting. Most of the subsidies here are quite properly classified by IMF as subsidies. They're from the so-called externalization of the socioeconomic and environmental costs of fossil fuel pollution. IMF repeated this study just a year or 18 months ago. It came out still just over $5 trillion a year. So there has to be a united, all-out campaign, constant campaign to force our governments to stop this and stop it immediately. Yes, they promised to stop them for years and years and years, the G8, for example, but clearly they won't do it unless we force them to do it. So back to this approach of conversions. We have to switch our practices of industrial production, our services and goods, which we can do totally off the greenhouse gas pollution ones that we have today, onto what we know are not greenhouse gas pollution. Now, this is a great example because this is conversion of construction for carbon dioxide pollution. If you go anywhere in the world, you'll see that the new construction is of steel and concrete. Nothing could be worse for greenhouse gas pollution and the destruction of our climate and of our oceans. Steel, of course, has to be heated in blast furnaces with coal, and concrete is made by burning limestone. And limestone is our other big carbon dioxide sink, which has occurred over millions and millions and hundreds of millions of years. So we are burning all our fossil carbon, which has allowed life over the past billion years to develop and prosper and flourish, such as it is today in the Cenozoic. That's crazy. What we can be doing, and what now we are seeing happen more and more, is to use construction, of course, with wood. We've been doing that in Europe for hundreds and hundreds of years. And now we have modern manufactured engineered wood, and we can build multi-story buildings with wood. Now, that sinks carbon for hundreds of years. So that's good news. Agriculture, of course, I look quite simply at climate disruption from two big sources: industrial energy production and industrial food production. So modern, and this is also good news because there is more and more and more awareness, more and more being written about agriculture as a major source and food production as a major source of greenhouse gas emissions, particularly methane from livestock, nitrous oxide from chemical agribusiness, chemical intensive agriculture. And so this is just an illustration of the approach of carbon farming. Organic is best for climate, agroforestry is best for climate, and of course, soil and biomass management, no-till agriculture, all of these are a big conversion of what is the dominant industrial model of agriculture and food production. So there's a good illustration. This is how it's done on the Great Plains, the great bread baskets of the world. And traditionally, we have regenerative organic agriculture. So this is coming back. Good news is there's more and more and more of it. There's more and more organic produce and locally produced produce you can buy in your stores. And permaculture is also a fine example of this form of food production. So nitrous oxide emissions, as I mentioned, from chemical intensive, and also carbon dioxide emissions from highly mechanized approach to industrial agriculture, and also monocropping, which has other problems of its own. So we switch that to carbon retaining agriculture, mixed organic, natural, organic fertilizer, natural fertilizers, and permaculture, as I mentioned. Individually, we have to therefore convert our diets, 100% again, 100% conversion. That means no meat, no dairy, so that we are not emitting methane. And it means the healthiest possible diet, which of course is vegetables, grains, fruits, and other plants. And as I say, the good news is that veganism is catching on fast. Subsidies also come in. Governments are also doing a bad, rotten thing by subsidizing this. And here you see the amount in tens of billions of dollars of meat and dairy agriculture compared to far less subsidizing of what is most healthy for Mother Earth, for the planet, and for ourselves. So switch those subsidies too. So we now come to the science of the climate change emergency. This is not so encouraging, but it's very important that we are aware of it and we face it and we understand the basics. So we need to use the science knowledge to help bolster our courage, our strength, our conviction, and our compassion. To avoid a global temperature increase of 2 degrees C and for 1.5 degrees C, greenhouse gas emissions must be declining by 2020 and drop to near zero before 2050. This illustration is from the IPCC fourth assessment in 2007. This is going way back. So you see, we have known that we have to allow emissions, we have to make our conversion so our emissions drop to near zero over the next few decades. We've known this for a long time. This is the new version, which confirms this. This is the famous IPCC 1.5 degree C report, which says that CO2 emissions must drop 50% by 2030, and they can, and reach net zero carbon emissions before 2050. However, in this illustration from the best case scenario for 1.5C, the net zero was with virtual zero fossil fuel emissions by 2050. So when we're talking net zero, we have to, every time we mention, say, this means net zero with no fossil fuel emissions. Otherwise, it can mean practically nothing. Commitment. This is why is climate change also being so bad? Why is it being always so frightening? Because of commitment, because whatever the global temperature is today, we are committed, we are locked into a much higher degree of warming, even if we do everything right in the future. So we have two commitments. We have this climate science commitment, which is inevitable, but the bigger commitment even today is that our governments are condemning us to a much higher degree of climate change by their own policy, which we've talked about. The condemned commitment, which is a crime of all time, of actual commitment of government policy, real government policy, not promises, puts the world at 3 degrees C of global temperature increase by 2100. Anything over 2 degrees C is unthinkable. But 3 degrees C by 2100 is 4 degrees C by 2300. At 2 degrees C, we have a decline in world food production, and we have runaway or hothouse Earth being triggered by multiple large sources of feedback emissions. So 3 degrees C is insane, it's ecocidal, it's suicidal, and it's biocidal by our own governments, and they must be told. So this brings us up to this month, April 2021, and this complicated illustration is a very valuable illustration from the Climate Action Tracker, which is by climate change experts. And this shows the current emissions gap to 2030. In the red, you see what has to happen. And the IPCC chair in 2009, Hossein Lee, no less, made a very strong statement that emissions have to decline, global emissions have to decline 2020 and thereafter. He used the word immediate several times. So this is what we have to force our governments to do. They can do it easily by stopping subsidizing and doing those so-called economic market failure corrections. But on the right in the blue, you'll see what's happening. These are the pledges, so-called promises, national emissions targets, which are the worst crime ever. And these are the targets by our own governments. They are planetary destructive targets. So in December, you see Climate Action Tracker had the national emissions going up, and with the latest promises, and they are only promises, there's a slight reduction, but there still is not a global decline in emissions. So there is this huge, huge gap between what the science says we have to do and our governments say they are doing and will do. But the defining reality is that our own world governments have pledged $313 billion to fossil fuel intensive sectors for the post-COVID recovery. You'll know that there was a sharp reduction, the biggest decline ever, in carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuels due to the temporary pause of the world economy by the COVID. Already, governments are pouring money into the fossil fuel industry so that already we are almost at the same level of emissions as we were pre-COVID in 2019. $313 billion. This report, this illustration here, is from the International Energy Agency, and it shows that world governments have already thrown away any chance of staying below 1.5 degrees C limit, and that 1.5 degrees C, according to the IPCC 1.5 C report, will be reached as early as 2035. So if you see here, you'll see there's the COVID drop, the sharp COVID drop 2000, and here we are 2021 with an equally sharp increase, an equally sharp uptick in the emissions. And the International Energy Agency predicts that 2021 will be the second largest increase in fossil fuel carbon dioxide emissions ever. This shows what's happening with regards to the indicators, with regards to the science we have, accelerating global surface heating and accelerating atmospheric CO2. This is very useful from the Oxford University. It's called the Global Warming Index. And the reddish line here is our global heating caused by our emissions. It removes the other extraneous factors. You see that clearly this is accelerating very fast right up to the present time. The green is the cumulative atmospheric CO2, also accelerating. This is climate craziness. This is insane. It must be stopped, and it can be stopped. This is the IPCC 1.5 degrees C report's projection of what we will be into if we stay on our current model of economics and if we stay on the current track of emissions. We will be at 1.5 degrees C by 2035, and we will be at 2 degrees C as early as 2045. This is a dire emergency. It's also an emergency because hunger and malnutrition are on the rise again. The world community has managed to slowly get hunger and malnutrition on a slow decline since 2005 here. This is from the FAO, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, their latest annual publication on food security and nutrition. And you'll see that in the past 3 years, hunger and malnutrition are on the rise again. They're projected to rise even faster, and it's mainly due to conflict and climate change. Conflict and climate change, of course, both at times go together. This is from a recent publication. It shows increased hunger at 1.5 degrees C. A world, largely a world of hunger and malnutrition. This is another recent publication that shows the yields of tropical crops, how they decline at low degrees of climate change. You see wheat going down sharply, you see rice going down less as sharp, and you see maize going down. We have known, the IPCC has been telling us since year 2001 that tropical low latitude regions will lose food at low degrees of global climate change. So this is a terrible, terrible crime as well, that governments are allowing and perpetuating this. So this is more science. This shows accelerating global atmospheric greenhouse gases from 2000 through to the present year, January of 2021. Top is carbon dioxide, accelerating. It's now at 416 parts per million of air. Methane, middle in blue, accelerating very fast in the past few years, as you see. Nitrous oxide also accelerating. More recent data, even, this is from NOAA, US, this is April 2021, carbon dioxide accelerating faster than ever. Methane still accelerating, nitrous oxide also accelerating very fast. Of course, the most important one obviously is carbon dioxide, accelerating extremely fast. This is 2017 to 2021, just recent. And you see this recent uptick here, despite the COVID decline in emissions. And this is the longer term, 1960 up to 2021. So remember, carbon dioxide is responsible for the vast majority of the global heating, and of course responsible for all of the ocean acidification. This is from the Scripps Institute. What we were looking at was from the NOAA, and this is also in the US. This shows the atmospheric CO2 at its unprecedented level and its unprecedented rate of increase. This is the record from 1700, in fact, up to the present time, 2021 April. So up, 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 fast, fast, fast. Here at 300 parts per million is the 1 million year limit from the ice cores. And here we are at 416. 278 down here is the pre-industrial value level. Consequently, we have accelerating global surface temperature increase. This is showing from 1880 through to 2020. It's from NASA GISS. On the left here, you see the global average. That's land and sea, accelerating very fast over the past decade. This is global land only, shooting up. Land temperature increase last year was 1.62 degrees C. We are in a dire planetary Earth emergency. These are the maps from NASA GISS. Global land sea on the left from NASA, and land only on the right, which I've adapted to highlight the land. This is last year. Look at this maximal heating anywhere on Earth of Siberia. And Siberia is the location, the region which holds most of the permafrost. And permafrost holds a massive amount of carbon, double all the carbon in the atmosphere. Permafrost is thawing, and it's emitting all three greenhouse gases as it thaws. This shows accelerating northern hemisphere global temperature, and this shows the lower rate of accelerating of southern hemisphere. So the northern hemisphere global north people and policymakers should be very, very alarmed by this. This is the Arctic. The Arctic is heating up faster than anywhere else. This is bad, 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 because Arctic sea ice is melting away. We have permafrost thawing, which is the most serious aspect of the Arctic amplification. The Arctic is warming 2 to 3 times faster than the global average. In these regions of Siberia, it's warming at faster, more than 3 times the global average even. You'll see again how on year 2000, Arctic temperature increase takes off compared to the global average temperature increase, and both are accelerating, but the Arctic accelerating very, very fast. Here's that region of Siberia, and in 2000, the temperature increase from these regions in Siberia were 3 degrees C above average, which is about 3.3 degrees C above pre-industrial, and more than 5 degrees C above average in these coastal areas. This is terrible, terrible. And it's terrible because the Arctic is vital for the stability of our climate. This is from a recent IPCC assessment, 2019, and this shows the oceans. This shows accelerating marine impacts. We have ocean heat on the top accelerating. We have marine heat waves accelerating. Those heat waves are destroying the tropical warm water coral reefs. We have ocean acidification accelerating. We have ocean deoxygenation almost on an accelerating track. Ocean deoxygenation is the result of ocean heating. So the ocean the unseen ocean is doing very, very badly due to industrial greenhouse gas emissions, atmospheric pollution. And while, of course, life in the oceans can do very well without life on land is dependent on life and the health of the ocean in the long term. This is from the Arctic. Another IPCC assessment in 2009 shows the rapid increase of adverse impacts on planetary snow and ice, the so-called cryosphere. Ocean sea ice crashing down. The red here is the worst case scenario that we're on. The blue is the best case scenario, which we've already missed. So Arctic sea ice, rapid decline. Arctic snow cover, rapid decline. Loss of sea ice and loss of snow means less reflection of solar energy away from the planet, which means more heating. So the more sea ice we lose, the more heating we get. The more northern hemisphere snow cover we lose, the more heating we get. This is the most important one, the permafrost, as I say. Here's the thawing, the near surface permafrost area, the permanently frozen land becoming less and less as it's heated up by Arctic amplification. Greenland, last mention, Greenland ice sheet, Antarctic ice sheet, they're all now losing mass faster than ever. The glaciers, of course, as a whole. We hear a lot about the Greenland and the ice sheets melting and the sea level rise. Of course, in the future, this will be catastrophic for coastal areas, but by far the most important thing is those feedbacks, the loss of permafrost, the melting of permafrost, also the feedbacks from the collapse of the Amazon and the destruction of the tropical forest. I'll stop there on that tragic negative note, and thank you for listening.